They said a widow should mourn in silence. They said a woman had no place commanding coal empires and industrial kingdoms. They whispered she would fall, crumble under the weight of grief, scandal, and London's merciless judgment. They were wrong. This is the story of Eliza Ravenscroft, the woman who walked into a glittering ballroom after 2 years of exile, locked eyes with England's most feared duke, and ignited a war that would shake the foundations of power itself. Stay until the end to see how one fearless decision changed everything. Hit that like button and tell us which city you're watching from in the comments below. The chandeliers of Ashford Hall blazed like 1,000 fallen stars, casting golden light across marble floors where England's elite gathered in their finest silks and darkest secrets. The annual Winterbourne Charity Ball was less about charity and more about power. Who held it, who craved it, and who would kill to keep it? Eliza Ravenscroft stood at the entrance to the grand ballroom, her gloved hand resting lightly on the carved mahogany doorframe. 2 years. 2 years since she had last stepped into this world of crystalline laughter and venomous smiles. 2 years since her husband's sudden death had made her both wealthy and vulnerable in equal, terrible measure. "You don't have to do this," Margaret whispered beside her. Her lady's maid had been with her through the worst of the mourning, through the endless nights when grief felt like drowning. "We can leave. Say you fell ill. No one would blame you." Eliza's jaw tightened. Blame. That word had followed her like a shadow since Thomas died. Blamed for being too young. Blamed for inheriting too much. Blamed for refusing to sell the Ravenscroft coal estates to the vultures who circled the moment her husband's body grew cold. "They expect me to hide," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the wild hammering of her heart. "They expect me to surrender what is mine by right. I will do neither." She stepped forward, and the world shifted. The ballroom fell silent in waves, conversation dying like wind-snuffed candles as heads turned. 300 pairs of eyes fixed on her with the intensity of a firing squad. She wore midnight blue silk, dark as winter sky, cut in a style that was elegant but not ostentatious. Her auburn hair was swept up in a simple arrangement, and she wore no jewels except her wedding band and a single sapphire pendant that had belonged to her mother. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had survived hell and emerged with her spine straight and her head high. "Good Lord," someone muttered. "That's the Ravenscroft widow." "I heard she runs the mines herself," another voice hissed, "actually descends into the shafts like a common laborer." "Unseemly. Thomas would be ashamed." Eliza's fingers curled into fists inside her gloves, but her expression remained serene. Let them whisper, let them judge. She had not come here to beg for their approval. She had come to remind them she existed. Lady Catherine Ashford, the evening's hostess, swept forward with the practiced grace of a woman who had spent 40 years navigating society's treacherous waters. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. "Mrs. Ravenscroft," she said, taking both of Eliza's hands. "How wonderful to see you among us again. We have missed your presence these long months." Liar, Eliza thought, but she smiled. "You are too kind, Lady Ashford. I could not miss supporting such a worthy cause." "Indeed, the orphanage benefits greatly from our efforts." Lady Ashford's gaze swept over Eliza's dress, her jewelry, searching for weakness, for scandal. "You look well. The northern air must agree with you." "Hard work agrees with me," Eliza replied smoothly. "The estate flourishes." A flicker of surprise crossed Lady Ashford's face. Most widows would downplay their success, minimize their role, but Eliza was done minimizing herself. "How modern of you." Lady Ashford's smile grew brittle. "Do come in. I'm sure you'll find the evening most enlightening." It was a warning wrapped in silk. Eliza moved deeper into the ballroom, acutely aware of the whispers that followed her like a wake. She recognized faces. Lord Pembroke, who had tried to buy her collieries at a fraction of their worth. Mrs. Eleanor Hartley, who had spread rumors that Thomas's death was suspicious. Sir Reginald Thornton, the banking magnate who had sent 3 separate letters demanding she accept his financial guidance. Sharks, all of them. Circling. Waiting. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman, more for something to do with her hands than any real desire to drink. Her stomach was twisted in knots, but her face remained calm. Years of training, first as a merchant's daughter, then as a nobleman's wife, had taught her how to mask emotion behind perfect manners. "You're braver than I gave you credit for." The voice came from her left, low and amused. Eliza turned to find Lord Julian Hartwell watching her with open curiosity. He was young, perhaps 30, with the easy confidence of inherited wealth and no real responsibility. "Bravery or foolishness," Eliza replied. "The line is often thin." "In your case, I suspect the former." He gestured at the room. "They're terrified of you, you know." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "Of me? A widow?" "A widow who holds industrial power without a man's name to hide behind." Julian's smile was genuine. "That's revolutionary, Mrs. Ravenscroft, and revolution makes people nervous." Before Eliza could respond, the energy in the room shifted like a storm front rolling in. The orchestra faltered mid-note. Conversation stopped. Every head turned toward the main entrance. Duke Nathaniel Wardmore had arrived. Eliza had never met him, but she knew his reputation as well as anyone in England. He was a paradox, a duke with ancient bloodlines who had spent his youth in the harsh northern territories, building rail lines through impossible terrain with his own hands alongside his workers. Where other nobility played at business, Wardmore built empires. Where others inherited power, he seized it. He was feared, respected, and utterly alone. The Duke moved through the crowd like a blade through water, and Eliza understood immediately why people stepped back. It wasn't his height, though he stood well over 6 feet. It wasn't his appearance, though his dark hair and sharp features carried a rough handsomeness that contrasted starkly with the powdered perfection of London's gentleman. It was his eyes. Gray as winter steel, they missed nothing. This was a man who had built his fortune in places where weakness meant death, where trust was earned in blood and kept through strength. He wore formal evening dress, but it sat on him like armor on a warrior, technically correct but fundamentally wrong, as if he belonged in rougher clothes in harsher places, and he was walking directly toward her. The ballroom held its collective breath. Eliza's heart slammed against her ribs, but she held her ground. She had not survived 2 years of wolves at her door to flinch now. Nathaniel Wardmore stopped 3 feet away and executed a bow that was precise but not elaborate. When he straightened, those steel-gray eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that felt like standing too close to a furnace. "Mrs. Ravenscroft," he said. His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting orders over industrial machinery and howling northern winds. "I believe the next waltz is mine." It was not a question. The room erupted in whispers. Julian Hartwell's eyebrows shot up. Lady Ashford looked like she might faint. Sir Reginald Thornton's face flushed an ugly purple. Eliza should have been terrified. This was the Duke of Wardmore, a man who could destroy her with a word, who controlled rail lines that could strangle her coal shipments, who wielded power that made her own industrial holdings look like toys. But as she met those gray eyes, she saw something unexpected. Recognition. This was not a predator sizing up prey. This was one survivor acknowledging another. "I don't recall us being introduced, Your Grace," Eliza said, her voice steady. "We haven't been." The corner of his mouth lifted in something that wasn't quite a smile. "An oversight I'm correcting. Now about that waltz." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to maintain propriety, to avoid becoming entangled with a man whose reputation was as dangerous as his power. But Eliza had not returned to London to hide. "I accept," she said clearly. The whispers turned to gasps. Nathaniel extended his hand. Eliza placed her gloved fingers in his palm, and even through layers of silk and kid leather, she felt the calluses there, proof that this duke had built his empire with his own hands, not just inherited coffers. He led her onto the floor as the orchestra, recovering from their shock, struck up a Viennese waltz. Other couples scrambled to join, but everyone knew the truth. This dance belonged to them alone. Nathaniel's hand settled at her waist, and they began to move. He danced with the same precision he likely brought to everything, calculated, controlled, but with an undercurrent of power barely restrained. "You're wondering why," he said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears only. I'm wondering several things, Your Grace. Nathaniel, he corrected. If we're going to be allies, we might as well dispense with unnecessary formality. Eliza's breath caught. Allies? You haven't heard? His eyes scanned the room even as they turned through the waltz. There are men in this ballroom who want us both destroyed. I'm aware of my enemies. Are you aware they've joined forces? Nathaniel's grip tightened slightly, steadying her as she missed a step. Sir Reginald Thornton, Lord Pembroke, the Exeter Banking Consortium. They want my rail corridor through the Northern Territories. Your coal fuels half the trains in England. We're obstacles to their monopoly. Eliza's mind raced. You're saying that's I'm saying we're on the same target list, Mrs. Ravenscroft. He spun her expertly, bringing them close. And right now, in this moment, I'm publicly declaring that you have my attention. Anyone who moves against you moves against me. Why? The word came out sharper than she intended. You don't know me. What do you gain? For the first time, something like respect flickered in those steel eyes. You didn't sell when your husband died. You took control of industrial holdings that terrify most men, and you've held them for 2 years without yielding an inch. You're either brilliant or insane, and I suspect the former. And if you're wrong, then we'll both burn. He smiled, and it transformed his harsh features into something almost warm. But I don't think I am. You wouldn't be here if you were weak. You'd be hiding in your northern estate, selling off assets to buy peace. The waltz carried them past Sir Reginald, whose face had gone from purple to white. Eliza could feel the weight of his glare like a knife between her shoulder blades. This will make things worse, she said quietly. For both of us. Things were already worse, Nathaniel replied. Now at least we face the storm together. The music swelled toward its conclusion. Around them, other dancers maintained careful distance, giving them space that felt less like respect and more like quarantine. I received threats, Eliza admitted, surprising herself. Anonymous letters. Widows fall easily. I assumed they were empty intimidation. Nathaniel's expression darkened. They're not. I've had similar messages. More specific. They threaten to resurrect old scandals, to destroy what's left of my family name. Your wife. Eliza had heard the whispers. The Duke's young wife had died 5 years ago in suspicious circumstances. He had been cleared of any wrongdoing, but rumor was a harder thing to kill than facts. Caroline, his voice went flat. She fell from the tower at Shadowmere House during a storm. The inquiry ruled it an accident, but there are people who would gladly resurrect old ghosts if it serves their purpose. The waltz ended. They stood facing each other as applause rippled through the room, polite, measured, cold. Nathaniel had not released her hand. I'm hosting a charity event in 3 weeks, he said, his voice pitched for her alone. A ball at Shadowmere House. It will be the largest of the season. Every important family in England will attend. And you want me there, Eliza said, understanding immediately. I want you as co-host. His grip tightened fractionally. I want us to stand together in front of everyone who wishes us harm. I want to make it clear that any attack on one of us is an attack on both. It was madness. Shadowmere House was in the Northern Territories, days from London. Attending would mean public alliance with England's most controversial duke. It would paint a target on her back brighter than any she currently carried. It was also brilliant. They want spectacle, Eliza said slowly. You're proposing we give them one they can't control. Exactly. Nathaniel finally released her hand, stepping back. I know I'm asking much. You risk your reputation. My reputation is already in tatters, Eliza interrupted. The question is whether this risk brings me closer to safety or to ruin. I can't promise safety. Nathaniel's honesty was brutal. But I can promise you won't face the wolves alone. Eliza looked past him at the ballroom full of beautiful, vicious people, at Sir Reginald, whose smile held murder, at Lady Ashford, whose hospitality masked contempt, at the 100 other faces that had judged her, dismissed her, waited for her to fail. She thought of Thomas, who had believed in her even when society mocked him for marrying a merchant's daughter, who had taught her to read balance sheets and mineral reports, who had treated her as a partner, not property. He would have told her to be bold. I accept your proposal, Your Grace. She met his eyes steadily. Shadowmere House in 3 weeks. We'll show them what power actually looks like. Something fierce and approving flashed across Nathaniel's face. We will indeed, Mrs. Ravenscroft. He bowed again, deeper this time, then turned and strode from the ballroom. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea, and Eliza was left standing alone in the center of the floor. The whispers crashed over her like a tidal wave. Did she just... Alliance with Wardmore? Scandal? Ruin? Bold. Margaret appeared at her elbow, pale-faced. Madam, we should leave. Now. Not yet. Eliza's voice was steady, though her hands shook. We came to make a statement. We're not running. She walked through the crowd with her head high, nodding to people who stared, meeting eyes that quickly looked away. When Sir Reginald stepped into her path, she didn't slow. Mrs. Ravenscroft, he said, his voice dripping false concern. I do hope you know what you're doing. The Duke is a complicated man. His protection may not be worth the cost. And your financial guidance, Sir Reginald? Eliza smiled sweetly. What would that cost? My estate? My autonomy? My soul? His expression hardened. You are playing a dangerous game. No, sir. Eliza's smile vanished. I'm simply refusing to be a playing piece in yours. She moved past him, leaving him sputtering. Outside, the London night was cold and damp. Eliza's carriage waited, and she climbed in with Margaret, who immediately produced a flask of brandy. Drink, Margaret ordered, before you collapse. Eliza obeyed, the burn of alcohol steadying her racing pulse. Do you think I've made a terrible mistake? I think you've just declared war, Margaret said bluntly. The question is whether you can win it. Eliza stared out the window as the carriage rattled through London's gaslit streets. Somewhere in the Northern Territories, Nathaniel Wardmore was likely asking himself the same question. They were two solitary rulers who had just formed an impossible alliance. The game had changed, and Eliza Ravenscroft had no intention of losing. 3 days later, the first threat arrived. Eliza was in her London townhouse study, reviewing production reports from the Ravenscroft collieries, when Margaret brought in the Morning Post. Most of it was the usual fare. Bills, correspondence, invitations from people suddenly eager to curry favor now that she had the Duke's attention. But one letter was different. Plain paper, no return address, sealed with black wax. Don't open it, Margaret said immediately. It could be. If they wanted me dead, a letter bomb would be crude and obvious. Eliza broke the seal, her heart hammering despite her calm words. The message inside was brief. Widows fall easily. So do dukes. Withdraw your alliance, or the truth about Caroline Wardmore will bury you both. There was no signature. Eliza read it twice, then set it carefully on her desk. Fetch my cloak. We're going out. Where? To Wardmore's London residence. Eliza stood, smoothing her skirts. If someone is threatening us both, he needs to know about it. Margaret looked horrified. Madam, you cannot simply call upon a duke. I can if we're supposedly allies. Eliza was already moving toward the door. Besides, propriety is the least of my concerns right now. The Wardmore London house was in Mayfair, a fortress of stone and iron that looked more like a military installation than a nobleman's residence. Guards flanked the entrance, and Eliza had to present her card 3 times before being grudgingly admitted. The butler who greeted her was ancient, his face carved from granite. His Grace does not receive callers without appointment. Then tell His Grace that Mrs. Ravenscroft is here with information about threats against his life. Eliza kept her voice firm. I believe he'll make an exception. 5 minutes later, she was shown into a study that confirmed everything she'd suspected about Nathaniel Wardmore. The room was lined with maps, industrial maps, showing rail lines and mining operations and shipping routes. The desk was buried under correspondence and blueprints. This was a working room, not a showpiece. Nathaniel stood by the window, dressed in shirt sleeves and waistcoat, his cravat loosened. He looked tired, and Eliza realized with a start that he probably worked 18-hour days just as she did. Mrs. Ravenscroft. He gestured to a chair. Brandy? Please? She needed the steadying burn. He poured 2 glasses, handed her one, then sat on the edge of his desk rather than in the chair behind it. The informality was deliberate, a signal that they were equals here. "Show me the threat," he said without preamble. Eliza handed him the letter. He read it once, his expression darkening, then tossed it onto his desk. "Caroline," he said flatly. "They're going to use Caroline." "Is there truth to use?" Eliza asked carefully. "Forgive my bluntness, but if we're facing this together, I need to know what weapons our enemies hold." Nathaniel was silent for a long moment, swirling brandy in his glass. When he spoke, his voice was raw. "Caroline was unhappy. She married me for the title. I married her for her father's railway connections. It was a business arrangement that neither of us pretended was more." He stared into his glass. "She wanted London society. I wanted to build empires in places where ball gowns meant nothing. We made each other miserable. And the night she died, we argued. She wanted me to abandon the northern projects, to become the London Duke she'd imagined. I refused. She went to the tower room, her sanctuary, when she was angry. There was a storm." His jaw tightened. "The window was open. The stones were slick. She fell." "You weren't there when it happened," Eliza said quietly. "No, I was in my study 2 floors below. By the time I heard the screams and reached her," he stopped. "She was already gone. The inquiry cleared you. The inquiry found no evidence of foul play. That's different from declaring innocence in the court of public opinion." Nathaniel finally looked at her. "There were rumors, are still rumors, that I pushed her, that I planned it, that I'm a murderer who escaped justice through privilege." "Do you think the fall was truly an accident?" Eliza asked. "I've spent 5 years asking that question." Nathaniel's voice was hollow. "Caroline was unhappy, yes, but suicidal? I don't know. And not knowing is its own torture." Eliza set down her brandy glass. "If our enemies resurrect this scandal, they won't care about truth. They'll use it to destroy your reputation and your business interests, and anyone allied with you. Which is why I'll understand if you withdraw your acceptance." Nathaniel met her eyes. "I asked you to stand with me. I didn't realize the foundation I was asking you to stand on was this fragile. It would be easy to walk away. Sensible, even. Eliza could return to her northern estate, maintain her holdings, avoid the firestorm that was clearly coming. But she thought of Thomas again, of his belief that power unused was power wasted, of his conviction that the strong had an obligation to protect, not just to profit. And she thought of the anonymous threats. Widows fall easily. They were coming for her regardless. At least this way she wouldn't face them alone. "I'm not withdrawing," Eliza said firmly. "But we need to be smarter than they are. They're using fear and scandal as weapons. We need to find weapons of our own." Nathaniel studied her with something that might have been hope. "You have something in mind." "Information." Eliza stood, pacing. "They threaten you with Caroline's death. Why? Because they need your rail corridor but can't simply seize it legally. They need to force your hand, make you sell to avoid scandal." "And you?" "They want my collieries, probably to monopolize coal transport on those same rail lines." Eliza turned to face him. "Sir Reginald Thornton is behind this. I'm certain of it. He's tried to buy me out 3 times. Each refusal has made him more aggressive." "Reginald works with the Exeter Consortium," Nathaniel said slowly. "They've been pushing for exclusive contracts on my northern lines. I refused. They threatened to build competing railways, which would be financially ruinous for everyone involved unless—" Eliza's eyes widened. "Unless they're not actually planning to build. They're planning to take what's already built. By destroying us first." Nathaniel stood, understanding dawning. "Bankrupt me through scandal, forcing a sale. Seize your collieries through financial manipulation or foreclosure. Then merge the assets into a single monopoly." "Exactly." Eliza felt the pieces clicking together. "We're not separate targets. We're 2 halves of the same prize." Nathaniel was quiet, his tactical mind clearly working through scenarios. Finally, he nodded. "Then we need to make ourselves undestroyable. The ball at Shadowmere House. We use it to solidify alliances, to make it clear that attacking us means attacking dozens of other powerful families. A shield of connections," Eliza said. "And meanwhile, we investigate. Quietly." Nathaniel's expression hardened. If Reginald and the Exeter Consortium are planning something illegal, false foreclosures, forged documents, bribery, we need proof. You want to go to war? I want to end the war before it consumes us both. Nathaniel moved closer, his intensity palpable. These men see us as obstacles to be removed. I propose we become consequences they can't afford. Eliza should have been frightened. This was beyond anything she'd faced before, but instead she felt alive in a way she hadn't since Thomas died. She had purpose again. Direction. I'll need access to financial records, she said. My late husband's papers. There were dealings with Thornton's bank that never sat right with me. If I look harder, I might find irregularities. I'll put investigators on the Exeter Consortium. Discreetly. Nathaniel picked up the threatening letter. And I'll have this analyzed. The paper, the wax, the handwriting. Someone wrote this. Someone can be traced. 3 weeks until the ball, Eliza said. Can we find enough evidence in 3 weeks? We have to. Nathaniel's smile was grim. Because at that ball, we're either going to announce our victory or become targets too visible to miss. Eliza extended her hand. Then we have an accord, Your Grace. Partnership until this threat is eliminated. Nathaniel took her hand, and this time the handshake was firm, equal. Partnership, he agreed. And Eliza? Call me Nathaniel. Formality seems absurd given the circumstances. Eliza, she replied. And Nathaniel? Try not to get killed before the ball. I'd hate to face those wolves alone. His laugh was rough but genuine. I'll do my best. As Eliza's carriage carried her back through London's crowded streets, she stared out at the city that had once been her whole world. Before Thomas died. Before she'd learned that power made you a target as surely as weakness made you prey. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to find evidence that could bring down some of England's most powerful men. 3 weeks to survive threats both overt and hidden. 3 weeks to prove that a widow and a duke could reshape the balance of power. Eliza settled back against the cushions, her mind already cataloging every document she'd need to review, every connection she'd need to chase. The game was deadly. But for the first time in 2 years, Eliza Ravenscroft felt like she was playing to win. The Ravenscroft townhouse library smelled of old leather and lamp oil as Eliza spread Thomas's financial ledgers across the mahogany table. It was past midnight, but sleep felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Margaret had long since retired, leaving Eliza alone with columns of numbers that held secrets she was only beginning to understand. Her husband had been meticulous. Every transaction documented, every contract filed, every correspondence preserved. But as Eliza traced her finger down entries from 3 years ago, she found something that made her blood run cold. A loan. £50,000 from Thornton Private Banking, secured against the Ravenscroft Northern Collieries. The interest rate was criminal, 15% compounded quarterly. Thomas had signed it 6 months before his death. But here was the peculiar part. The loan had been repaid. In full. 2 weeks after Thomas died, using funds from the estate's emergency reserves. Eliza remembered authorizing the payment herself, desperate to reduce any vulnerability while she was still reeling from grief. So why were there 3 separate letters from Thornton's bank, dated within the past 6 months, demanding payment on the outstanding loan? Eliza's hand shook as she pulled out her own correspondence files. There. 3 increasingly threatening letters claiming the loan had never been satisfied, that the Ravenscroft collieries were in default, that foreclosure proceedings would begin unless she paid £65,000 immediately. She had ignored them, assuming it was a clerical error. The payment had been made. She had the bank drafts to prove it. Except now, looking closer, she couldn't find those drafts. The library door opened. Eliza jumped, hand flying to the letter opener on the desk. A ridiculous weapon, but all she had. Easy. Nathaniel stepped into the lamplight, his greatcoat dusted with rain. Your housekeeper let me in. She said you were still awake. What are you doing here? Eliza's heart was still hammering. It's past midnight. I found something. Nathaniel pulled a folded paper from his coat. And based on your expression, so did you. Eliza gestured at the chaos of ledgers. Thomas took a loan from Thornton's bank. I repaid it after he died. Now Thornton claims it was never repaid and is threatening foreclosure. Let me guess. Nathaniel's expression was grim. The payment records have vanished. How did you know? Because the same thing happened to 3 other Northern estate holders in the past 2 years. He unfolded his paper, a list of names. Lord Ashmont, Sir Geoffrey Blackwood, the Haversham Family Trust. All took loans from Thornton's Bank or the Exeter Consortium. All repaid them. All were subsequently threatened with foreclosure for non-payment. What happened to them? Ashmont sold his mining rights at a loss to avoid scandal. Blackwood's estate was seized and auctioned. Exeter bought it for a fraction of its value. The Havershams are fighting in court, but they're hemorrhaging money on legal fees. Nathaniel set the list on the table. It's a pattern, a system. They're manufacturing debt. Eliza felt sick. Taking legitimate loans, accepting payment, then destroying the payment records and claiming default. And foreclosing on properties worth 10 times the loan value. Nathaniel's voice was hard as iron. It's fraud on an industrial scale. But proving it requires evidence they've spent considerable effort destroying. Eliza stared at the ledgers, her mind racing. The bank drafts. I authorized payment through Coots. They would have records. If Thornton hasn't corrupted them too. Nathaniel pulled out a chair and sat heavily. Reginald has connections throughout London's banking district. If he's willing to forge loan records, he's willing to bribe clerks. Then we go higher. Eliza's jaw set. The Bank of England maintains transaction records for amounts over £10,000. Federal audit trail. Harder to corrupt. Nathaniel looked at her with surprise and growing respect. You've studied financial law. My father was a merchant. He taught me that contracts are only as good as the evidence supporting them. She began gathering the ledgers. I'll go to the Bank of England tomorrow, request a formal accounting of all transactions between the Ravenscroft estate and Thornton's bank. That will alert Thornton that you're investigating. Good. Eliza's smile was sharp. Let him know I'm not the ignorant widow he assumed. Let him worry about what else I might uncover. Nathaniel studied her in the lamplight. You realize this makes you a more immediate threat. If Reginald panics, he makes mistakes. Eliza met his gaze steadily. We can't win by hiding. We win by forcing him to react before he's ready. Aggressive tactics. Nathaniel's approval was evident. I like it, but you'll need protection. Someone watching your back while you're digging through bank records. I have Margaret. Margaret is a lady's maid, not a bodyguard. Nathaniel stood. I'm assigning 2 of my men to you, former soldiers. They'll be discreet, but they'll be there. Eliza wanted to argue, to insist she could handle herself. But the memory of those anonymous threats, widows fall easily, made her swallow her pride. Thank you, she said quietly. Nathaniel moved toward the door, then paused. Eliza, be careful at the Bank of England. Bureaucracies move slowly, but they also talk. By evening, half of London's financial district will know you're investigating Thornton. I'm counting on it, Eliza replied. We need to draw him out, don't we? Make him reveal his hand? Just remember, cornered animals are the most dangerous. After Nathaniel left, Eliza returned to the ledgers, but her concentration was fractured. She kept seeing Thomas's handwriting, his careful notations, and wondered how much he'd known. Had he suspected Thornton's bank was corrupt? Had he been investigating himself when he died? Thomas had fallen down the main staircase at their London house. Broken neck. The coroner ruled it accidental. He'd been drinking, the stairs were steep, accidents happened. But Thomas rarely drank to excess, and he knew those stairs intimately. For the first time in 2 years, Eliza allowed herself to think the unthinkable. What if Thomas's death hadn't been an accident? The Bank of England was a fortress of Portland stone and financial power, its columned facade projecting authority that had endured for over a century. Eliza climbed the steps the next morning with Margaret beside her and 2 of Nathaniel's men, Davis and Colton, following at a discreet distance. The clerk who greeted her was young and nervous, clearly unused to women requesting audit records. Mrs. Ravenscroft, the process for obtaining historical transaction data requires several forms and approval from, I'm aware of the process. Eliza kept her voice pleasant but firm. I'm requesting records under the Commercial Audit Act of 1844, which grants estate executors access to complete financial histories when fraud is suspected. I've brought the necessary documentation. She slid a folder across the marble counter. The clerk paled as he reviewed the papers, all meticulously prepared, all legally airtight. This will take time to compile. I'll wait, Eliza smiled. I have nowhere else to be. It took 4 hours. 4 hours of sitting in an uncomfortable chair while clerks scurried and whispered and occasionally shot her nervous glances. Margaret kept up a steady stream of quiet commentary about the other people coming and going, mostly men in expensive suits, conducting business that moved markets and toppled kingdoms. Finally, the clerk returned with a leather portfolio. Mrs. Ravenscroft, the records you requested. Eliza opened the portfolio right there at the counter, and her blood turned to ice. The Bank of England's records showed no payment from the Ravenscroft estate to Thornton Private Banking. None. The £50,000 transfer she clearly remembered authorizing had simply vanished. But there was something else. 3 other transactions she didn't recognize. Payments from the Ravenscroft estate to Thornton's bank, each for £5,000, each occurring after Thomas's death. Payments she had never authorized. Who processed these transactions? Eliza's voice was steady despite the fury building in her chest. The clerk checked a notation. They were authorized by Mr. Gerald Whitmore, acting as a state executor. Whitmore? Eliza's mind raced. Gerald Whitmore had been Thomas's solicitor. He'd helped her navigate the legal complexities after Thomas died, had seemed genuinely concerned for her welfare. Mr. Whitmore had no authority to make payments on my behalf. According to our records, he presented power of attorney documents dated 2 weeks after Mr. Ravenscroft's death. The clerk looked uncomfortable. We verified the signatures at the time. Show me the documents. The clerk retrieved them, and Eliza's suspicions crystallized into certainty. The signature on the power of attorney was hers, but she had never signed any such document. It was a forgery. A good one, but a forgery nonetheless. I need copies of everything, Eliza said, her voice hard. Every transaction, every authorization, every notation. Mrs. Ravenscroft, are you alleging... I'm alleging fraud, forgery, possibly conspiracy. She met the clerk's eyes. And I will need the Bank of England to provide official testimony to that effect when this goes to court. The clerk swallowed hard. I'll need to speak to my supervisor. Please do. An hour later, Eliza left the Bank of England with copies of every relevant document and a formal letter from the bank's deputy director acknowledging irregularities in transaction authorizations that warranted further investigation. It was everything she needed, and it made her a target that now had a bullseye painted in blood. Davis, the larger of Nathaniel's 2 guards, moved closer as they descended the steps. Ma'am, there's a gentleman watching from across the street. Gray coat, black hat. He's been there since we arrived. Eliza didn't turn to look. Is he armed? Can't tell, but he's got the stance of someone who's used to violence. Then we proceed as planned. Eliza kept walking toward her carriage. Margaret, when we return home, send word to Nathaniel immediately. Tell him I have proof. And what about the man following us? Margaret's voice was tight with fear. Let him follow. Eliza climbed into the carriage. Let him report back to whoever sent him. They need to know I'm not backing down. The ride back to her townhouse was tense. Eliza kept her hand on the letter opener in her reticule. Still a useless weapon, but psychologically comforting. Davis and Colton rode on the carriage exterior, alert for threats. They made it home without incident, but Eliza's relief evaporated when she saw the second carriage parked outside her townhouse. A carriage bearing Sir Reginald Thornton's crest. Stay here, Davis ordered, moving toward the house. But Eliza was already stepping down, her fury overriding caution. This is my home, she said coldly, and I will not be made to feel afraid in it. The front door opened before she reached it. Her housekeeper, Mrs. Green, looked terrified. Mrs. Ravenscroft, Sir Reginald insisted on waiting for you. He's in the parlor. I tried to tell him you weren't receiving, but he... It's fine, Mrs. Green. Eliza handed her cloak to the housekeeper. I'll see him, but Davis and Colton are to remain directly outside the parlor door. Sir Reginald Thornton looked like prosperity incarnate. Well-fed, expensively dressed, radiating the confidence of a man who had never been told no in his entire privileged life. He stood by the fireplace in her parlor, examining a porcelain figurine as if evaluating its worth. Mrs. Ravenscroft, He set down the figurine with exaggerated care. Thank you for receiving me. You gave me little choice by barging into my home uninvited. Eliza remained standing, refusing to sit and thereby grant this meeting any semblance of civility. What do you want, Sir Reginald? To discuss your visit to the Bank of England. His smile was genial, but his eyes were cold. You've been making inquiries about your late husband's financial affairs. As your banker, I'm concerned. You're not my banker. I closed my accounts with Thornton Private Banking 6 months ago. Yet there remains the matter of the outstanding loan. There is no outstanding loan. Eliza's voice cut like a blade. The debt was repaid in full 2 years ago. You accepted payment. Then you destroyed the records and attempted to steal my property through fraudulent foreclosure. Sir Reginald's smile never wavered. Those are serious accusations, Mrs. Ravenscroft. Do you have proof? I have the Bank of England's official audit records. I have evidence of forged authorizations. I have documentation of a systematic pattern of fraud targeting Northern estate holders. Eliza stepped closer. And I'm taking all of it to the Metropolitan Police and the Chancery Court. For the first time, something flickered behind Reginald's eyes. Not fear. Men like him didn't fear easily. But calculation. Recalibration. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. You're a young woman alone in a world that doesn't forgive female ambition. Your alliance with Wardmore won't protect you. If anything, it makes you more vulnerable. He's a marked man, and you've tied yourself to his sinking ship. Nathaniel Wardmore built an empire with his bare hands. You built yours by stealing from those too weak to fight back. Eliza's voice was steady, but rage burned beneath every word. The difference is, his foundation is steel, yours is lies. Steel melts, Reginald replied, and widows break. You should consider that before you proceed with this crusade. Is that a threat? It's advice, from someone who wishes you no harm. He moved toward the door. Think carefully, Mrs. Ravenscroft. You have a great deal to lose, a tragic accident perhaps, a fall down some stairs. These old London houses can be so treacherous. The room went very still. Eliza felt ice spread through her veins as the implication hit home. A fall down some stairs, just like Thomas. You killed my husband. The words came out barely above a whisper. Reginald paused at the door. Your husband died in an unfortunate accident. The coroner said so. But accidents do seem to follow those who make unwise financial decisions, don't they? He glanced back at her. I'd hate for you to suffer a similar fate. Perhaps you should consider selling the collieries to interests better equipped to manage them. For your own safety. He left before Eliza could respond, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Davis appeared in the doorway immediately. Ma'am, are you all right? Eliza realized she was shaking, not from fear, from fury so intense it felt like fire in her blood. Send for Nathaniel, she said, her voice deadly calm. Tell him to come immediately, and tell him to bring whatever evidence he's gathered. Ma'am, what did Thornton say? Eliza met Davis's eyes. He confessed to murdering my husband. He just didn't realize he was doing it. An hour later, Nathaniel arrived with his own folders of evidence. Eliza met him in the library, where she'd laid out everything she'd discovered. Reginald was here, she said without preamble. He threatened me, and he all but admitted to having Thomas killed. Nathaniel's expression went from concerned to murderous. Tell me exactly what he said. Eliza recounted the conversation word for word. When she finished, Nathaniel was gripping the edge of the table hard enough to whiten his knuckles. We're going to destroy him, he said quietly. Not just defeat him, destroy him completely. I want justice for Thomas. Eliza's voice broke slightly. For 2 years I thought it was an accident, that I could have prevented it somehow, if I'd just been more careful, more attentive. But it was murder. Reginald had him killed because Thomas was investigating the loan fraud. How do you know Thomas was investigating? Eliza pulled out another ledger. I found this hidden in a false bottom in his desk. Notes, observations. Thomas documented 3 cases of suspicious foreclosures, all connected to Thornton's bank. He was building a case, just like we are. And Reginald found out. Nathaniel studied the notes, his tactical mind clearly working. This is evidence. but it's circumstantial. We need something concrete linking Reginald to the actual murder. Then we set a trap. Eliza's eyes were hard. The ball at Shadowmere House. We use it as bait. We let Reginald think he's won, that we're afraid and backing down. Then we spring the trap in front of everyone. That's dangerous. If he suspects, he already suspects. He's threatening me openly. Eliza's jaw set. But arrogance is his weakness. He thinks we're desperate. He thinks he holds all the power. We use that. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, but we do this smart. We need allies, people who will witness what happens and can't be bought or intimidated. Who did you have in mind? Lord Chancellor Pemberton. He's a crusader against financial corruption. If we can get evidence in front of him at the ball, he'll act. Nathaniel's smile was grim. Reginald can bribe local magistrates. He can't bribe the Lord Chancellor. What about the Metropolitan Police? Already contacted. Inspector Davies is sympathetic. His sister lost her estate to one of these fraudulent foreclosures. He's willing to investigate, but he needs evidence substantial enough to overcome Reginald's political connections. Eliza felt the pieces falling into place. So we build an airtight case. We present it at the ball with unimpeachable witnesses, and we force Reginald into a corner where his only options are confession or ruin, while making sure he can't arrange any more accidents before then. Nathaniel's expression was fierce. You're not going anywhere without guards, and I'm moving security at Shadowmere House to military levels. No one gets in or out without scrutiny. He'll know we're preparing for confrontation. Let him know. Nathaniel's voice was hard as iron. Let him worry. Let him make mistakes. Over the next 2 weeks, Eliza and Nathaniel worked with single-minded intensity. Eliza compiled financial evidence, every fraudulent transaction, every forged document, every victim of Thornton's systematic theft. Nathaniel's investigators tracked down witnesses, people who had worked for Thornton's bank and been party to the schemes. 2 former clerks agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. A messenger admitted to delivering threats. A forger confessed to creating false power of attorney documents, including the one used to steal from Eliza's estate. The case grew stronger by the day. But so did the threats. Eliza found a dead crow nailed to her door with a note. Stop digging or join your husband. Someone attempted to break into the townhouse at night. Davis and Colton fought them off, but it was clear the attacks were escalating. Nathaniel insisted Eliza move to his London residence for the final week before the ball. She resisted initially. It would fuel scandal, but pragmatism won over propriety. I'd rather face scandal than a blade in the dark, she admitted. The Wardmore London house became their fortress. They worked in Nathaniel's study until dawn most nights, cross-referencing evidence, building an ironclad case. The proximity forced a different kind of intimacy than their public alliance. Eliza saw Nathaniel without his armor, exhausted, driven, haunted by Caroline's death, and determined not to let Eliza suffer the same fate. One night, past midnight, Eliza found him staring at a portrait of Caroline that hung in the gallery. She was beautiful, Eliza said quietly. She was miserable. Nathaniel didn't look away from the painting. And I couldn't save her. Whether she jumped or fell or was pushed, I failed her. I should have seen how desperate she was. Should have done something different. You can't save people from themselves. Eliza moved to stand beside him. I've learned that these past 2 years. Thomas was investigating Reginald's fraud. I didn't know, couldn't have stopped him. His death isn't my failure. It's Reginald's crime. And Caroline? I don't know what happened to Caroline. But if Reginald is willing to kill men who threaten his schemes, he's willing to kill women too, especially one who might have known too much. Nathaniel turned to her sharply. What are you saying? Caroline was the daughter of a railway magnate. She understood finance, understood business. What if she discovered Reginald's fraud? What if that argument you had the night she died wasn't really about London versus the frontier? What if it was about something more dangerous? She never mentioned Reginald to me. Would she have? If she suspected something but didn't have proof yet? Eliza met his eyes. You said yourself, you made each other miserable. Would she have confided in you? Nathaniel's expression was anguished. I don't know. And I'll never know now. Then let's make sure Reginald answers for every life he's destroyed. Eliza's voice was steady. For Thomas. For the families he's ruined. And maybe for Caroline, too. 3 days before the ball, Eliza received a final threat. This one wasn't anonymous. It was signed. Mrs. Ravenscroft, you have made your choice. At Shadowmere House, surrounded by witnesses, you think you are safe. You think your evidence will protect you. You are wrong. Come to the ball. Bring your accusations. Watch how quickly society turns on a widow who dares to challenge her betters. I will not be destroyed by a coal merchant's daughter and a frontier duke. You will both fall, and I will walk away untouched. Enjoy your remaining days of freedom. Sir Reginald Thornton. Eliza read the letter twice, then handed it to Nathaniel. He's coming to the ball. He's walking right into our trap. Or he thinks he's setting one for us. Nathaniel's eyes were dark. He's confident, too confident. What could he possibly do at the ball, in front of hundreds of witnesses? I don't know. Nathaniel folded the letter carefully. But we need to be ready for anything, because Reginald Thornton doesn't make threats he can't back up. Then we'll be ready. Eliza felt the weight of everything they'd built, evidence, alliances, witnesses, and knew they had one chance to get this right. 3 days. 3 days and we end this. Nathaniel looked at her in the lamplight, and something shifted between them. Recognition of shared purpose, of partnership forged in fire. Whatever happens at Shadowmere House, he said quietly, we face it together. Together, Eliza agreed. Outside, London slept under a cold rain. But inside the Wardmore fortress, 2 survivors prepared for the battle that would determine their futures. The ball at Shadowmere House would be more than a social event. It would be a reckoning. The journey north to Shadowmere House took 2 days through terrain that grew progressively wilder. London's cobblestone streets and gas lamps gave way to muddy roads that wound through forests of ancient oak, past villages where coal dust stained everything gray, through valleys where Nathaniel's rail lines cut scars across moorland that had never known human touch until iron forced its way through. Eliza rode in Nathaniel's carriage, armed guards flanking them on horseback. The evidence they'd compiled filled 2 locked trunks secured to the rear carriage. Every document, every testimony, every piece of their case against Reginald Thornton traveled with them because leaving it in London meant risking theft or destruction. Tell me about Shadowmere House, Eliza said as they crested a hill and saw the northern territories spread before them, endless moors beneath threatening sky, wind that tasted of coal smoke and coming rain. Nathaniel gazed out at his kingdom with an expression Eliza couldn't quite read. Pride, perhaps? Or burden? It was a monastery once, before Henry VIII dissolved them. The Wardmores bought the ruins and rebuilt it as a fortress during the Civil War. His voice was matter-of-fact, but Eliza heard the weight beneath. Every duke since has added to it. My grandfather built the east wing. My father added the tower. The tower where Caroline died. Yes. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. I should have torn it down, but that felt like erasure, like pretending she never existed. Guilt, Eliza said quietly, makes us do strange things. For 2 years, I kept Thomas's study exactly as he left it, every paper in place, every pen where he'd set it, as if preserving the room could somehow preserve him. When did you stop? The day I decided to fight back. The day I realized he wouldn't want me frozen in grief. He'd want me to survive. She met Nathaniel's eyes. Caroline wouldn't want you imprisoned by guilt either. You didn't know Caroline. No, but I know what it's like to be married to someone building empires in harsh places. The loneliness, the feeling that you married a force of nature, not a man. Eliza's voice was gentle. Thomas loved his work more than he loved me. I accepted that because I understood it. Some people are built to build, and the rest of us either join them or watch from the sidelines. Nathaniel studied her with new intensity. You joined. You didn't just inherit Thomas's empire, you expanded it. Production reports show the Ravenscroft collieries have increased output by 30% since his death. You've been researching me. I've been trying to understand who I'm allied with. He smiled slightly. Most widows would have sold everything and retired to the countryside. You went into the mines yourself, learned the operations. made improvements that professional engineers missed. I had to. The workers wouldn't respect orders from a widow in a London parlor, so I went down into the shafts. Eliza remembered that first descent, the crushing darkness, the suffocating heat, the terror that the earth would collapse and bury her. I spent 3 days underground learning every aspect of coal extraction. When I came back up, filthy and exhausted, the foreman said I'd earned their respect and their loyalty. Loyalty is a stronger foundation than fear. Eliza looked out at the approaching fortress. That's why Reginald will lose. He rules through terror and manipulation. We rule through partnership. Shadowmere House materialized through mist like something from a ghost story. The original monastery walls still stood, thick stone that had weathered centuries. Newer wings sprawled outward in architectural styles spanning 400 years, Tudor, Georgian, Victorian, creating a structure that was part fortress, part palace, part industrial command center. But it was the tower that dominated everything. Rising from the north corner like an accusing finger pointing at heaven, the tower where Caroline Wardmore had fallen to her death was the darkest part of a dark house. Eliza felt cold just looking at it. Security is already in place, Nathaniel said as their carriage passed through gates manned by guards who looked more military than domestic. No one enters without identification. No one moves through the house without escort. Every entrance is watched. You've turned your home into a prison. I've turned it into a battlefield. His voice was hard. And I intend to win. Inside, Shadowmere House was organized chaos. Servants prepared for 300 guests while guards conducted security sweeps. The grand ballroom where the event would take place was 3 stories tall with a vaulted ceiling supported by stone columns, beautiful and oppressive in equal measure. Mrs. Brennan, the housekeeper, greeted them with military efficiency. Your Grace, Mrs. Ravenscroft, your rooms are prepared. Dinner will be served in an hour. Lord Chancellor Pemberton arrived this afternoon and requests a private meeting before the other guests arrive tomorrow. Show Mrs. Ravenscroft to her quarters, Nathaniel instructed. I'll meet with Pemberton immediately. Eliza's room was in the east wing, as far from the cursed tower as possible. It was elegant but austere. Heavy furniture, dark wood, windows that looked out over moorland stretching to the horizon. A prison for the privileged, she thought, then chastised herself for the uncharitable comparison. Margaret appeared to help her change for dinner. This house feels wrong, ma'am, like something terrible happened here. Something terrible did happen here. Eliza stared out at the tower, visible from her window. But we're going to make sure nothing terrible happens again. Dinner was a tense affair. Lord Chancellor Pemberton was 60, white-haired, with the bearing of a man who had spent 40 years in courtrooms watching liars squirm under examination. He listened as Nathaniel and Eliza presented their evidence, his expression never changing. When they finished, he sat back and steepled his fingers. You've built a compelling case. Fraud, forgery, possibly multiple murders. His voice was measured. But you understand the political complications. Sir Reginald has patronage connections to half the House of Lords. Moving against him will create enemies. Justice shouldn't be political, Eliza said. Justice is always political, Mrs. Ravenscroft. Pemberton's smile was thin. But in this case, the evidence is strong enough to overcome political considerations. If you can present this at the ball with sufficient witnesses, I'll have grounds to order immediate investigation and possibly arrest. If? Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. You have doubts? I have experience. Pemberton chose his words carefully. Men like Reginald don't corner easily. He's coming here knowing you have evidence. That suggests he has a counter-strategy. What kind of counter-strategy? Eliza felt ice form in her stomach. That's what concerns me. I don't know. Pemberton stood. But I suggest you prepare for him to attack your credibility, your motives, or both. Fraud trials turn on evidence, but society trials turn on reputation. If he can destroy yours before you present your case, the evidence becomes irrelevant. After Pemberton retired, Eliza and Nathaniel sat in his study reviewing their preparations for the 100th time. He's right, Nathaniel said finally. Reginald will attack us, not our evidence. He'll paint us as conspirators, lovers seeking revenge, or unstable people manufacturing scandal. Then we make sure our witnesses are unimpeachable. Eliza's mind was racing. The former bank clerks. The forger. Can they testify? They're hidden in the village under guard. I'll bring them to the ball at the crucial moment. Nathaniel poured whiskey, offering her a glass. But there's another vulnerability. Us. What do you mean? Our alliance. It started at a ball, grew through weeks of close collaboration, and now we're hosting together at my family home. He met her eyes. Reginald will claim we're romantically involved, that this entire case is fabricated to cover a scandal or seize combined power. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. That's absurd. Is it? Nathaniel's voice was quiet. We've spent nearly every waking hour together for 3 weeks. You're living in my house. By society's standards, our behavior has been necessary, Eliza interrupted. We were building a case against a murderer. Society doesn't care about necessity. They care about appearance. Nathaniel set down his glass. I'm not saying we've done anything wrong. I'm saying Reginald will twist the truth until it looks damning. Then what do? We acknowledge it before he can weaponize it. Nathaniel's expression was resolute. We make it clear that our alliance is professional, not romantic. That everything we've done has been in service of justice, not passion. Will people believe that? Some will, some won't. He smiled grimly, but at least they can't say we hid it. The night before the ball, Eliza couldn't sleep. She wandered Shadowmere House's corridors, trailed by Davis, who had been assigned to shadow her whenever she left her room. The house creaked and groaned around them, old stones settling, wind howling through gaps in medieval walls. She found herself drawn to the tower. Ma'am, I don't think, Davis began, but Eliza was already climbing the spiral stairs. The room at the top was exactly as she'd imagined, circular, windows on all sides, furniture covered in dust. A lady's sanctuary turned into a tomb. The window where Caroline had fallen was closed now, latched shut, but Eliza could picture it, storm raging, wind tearing through the opening, rain making stones slick. Why did you come up here that night? Eliza whispered to the ghost of a woman she'd never met. Were you trying to escape? Or were you pushed? She was running. Eliza spun. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, his expression haunted. I've thought about it for 5 years, he continued, entering the room slowly. Reviewed every detail. Caroline wasn't suicidal. She was angry, furious at me, at this life, at being trapped. When she was angry, she ran. Up here, where she could see the whole estate and imagine herself anywhere else. But the window was always open. She loved storms, said they made her feel alive. Nathaniel moved to the window, touching the latch. The inquiry suggested she went too close to the edge, that wind or vertigo made her fall. But Caroline wasn't careless. Then what happened? I think someone was here with her, someone she trusted enough to let into her sanctuary. Nathaniel's voice was rough. I think that someone pushed her. Reginald? Or someone working for him. Caroline knew things. Her father's railway business had dealings with Thornton's bank. If she'd discovered the fraud schemes, he trailed off. I have no proof, just a certainty that won't die. Eliza moved to stand beside him at the window. Below, moorland stretched into darkness, wind-whipped and desolate. Tomorrow, she said, we get proof, or we die trying. Cheerful thought. Honest thought. She turned to face him. Nathaniel, whatever happens tomorrow, thank you. For believing me. For standing with me. Thomas died alone, investigating corruption alone. I won't make that mistake. You're not alone anymore. Nathaniel's hand found hers in the darkness. Whatever storm comes, we face it together. It wasn't romance. Began arriving at noon. Disgorging began arriving at noon. Disgorging nobility in their finest clothes. Eliza watched from her window as London's elite flooded into Shadowmere House, transforming the fortress into a glittering spectacle. By 4 o'clock, 300 guests filled the ballroom and adjacent rooms. The charity ball was ostensibly raising funds for industrial worker relief, bitterly ironic given that many guests had made their fortunes exploiting those same workers. Eliza descended the main staircase at 5 o'clock, and the effect was calculated perfection. She wore silver silk that caught lamplight like water. Her auburn hair swept up to reveal a neck that Thomas had once said looked sculpted from marble. She wore no jewelry except her wedding band and the sapphire pendant, widow's dignity meeting aristocratic defiance. The crowd fell silent, as she'd known they would. Nathaniel waited at the bottom of the stairs, formal in black evening dress that made him look every inch the Duke despite his rough origins. When Eliza reached him, he offered his arm. "Ready?" he murmured. "No, but we're doing this anyway." They entered the ballroom together, and the whispers erupted immediately. Eliza caught fragments. Alliance, scandal, desperation, power grab, but held her head high. Sir Reginald Thornton stood near the orchestra platform, surrounded by allies and looking supremely confident. When his eyes met Eliza's, he smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had already won. The evening proceeded with agonizing slowness. Dinner, toasts, meaningless conversations where everyone said one thing and meant another. Eliza felt like a condemned prisoner at an execution masquerading as a party. At 9 o'clock, Nathaniel signaled Lord Chancellor Pemberton. It was time. Nathaniel stepped onto the orchestra platform as the musicians finished a waltz. The room fell silent, with the instinct of people sensing blood in the water. "Ladies and gentlemen," Nathaniel's voice carried through the ballroom, amplified by stone acoustics, "thank you for joining us this evening. Before we continue festivities, Mrs. Ravenscroft and I have important information to share regarding systematic fraud in London's banking industry." The silence turned electric. Reginald's smile never wavered. "Your Grace, is a charity ball really the venue for business discussions? When the business involves theft, forgery, and murder?" Eliza's voice rang clear as she joined Nathaniel on the platform. "Yes. I think the entire aristocracy deserves to know who among them is a criminal." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Mrs. Ravenscroft," Reginald's voice dripped condescension, "grief has clearly affected your judgment. These wild accusations are backed by evidence." Nathaniel gestured, and Davis carried one of the evidence trunks forward. "Evidence will now present to Lord Chancellor Pemberton and this assembly. Evidence manufactured by a widow desperate for relevance and a duke desperate to salvage his reputation." Reginald's voice hardened. "Everyone here knows the truth? You two have been living in sin for weeks, cooking up this conspiracy to seize my banking assets. This is nothing but an elaborate scheme born from illicit romance and naked ambition." "We've done nothing illicit," Eliza said coldly. "Unlike you, who has stolen from dozens of families through fraudulent foreclosures." "Prove it." Reginald's smile was shark-like. "You claim to have evidence? Present it. Let's see what fabrications you've created." Nathaniel opened the trunk, and his expression went from confident to confused to horrified in the space of 3 seconds. The trunk was empty. Not just empty, filled with blank paper. Every document, every testimony, every piece of evidence they'd compiled had vanished, replaced with worthless sheets. Eliza felt the floor drop from beneath her. "That's impossible. We locked it ourselves. No one could have—" "Could have what?" Reginald's voice was triumphant now. "Exposed your fiction? Ladies and gentlemen, you see before you 2 desperate people trying to destroy an innocent man with lies and empty accusations." "The second trunk," Nathaniel said urgently to Davis. "Bring the second trunk." But Eliza already knew what they would find. When Davis returned with the second trunk, it too contained nothing but blank paper. Their entire case had been stolen. The ballroom erupted in whispers. Eliza saw faces turning from curious to hostile, from sympathetic to contemptuous. Without evidence, they were nothing but conspirators spinning tales. "You switched the trunks," Eliza said, rounding on Reginald. "You stole our evidence." "I did no such thing." Reginald's innocence was perfectly performed. "Your delusions are not my responsibility, Mrs. Ravenscroft. Perhaps you should retire from public life until your grief-induced hysteria passes." "Hysteria?" Fury burned through Eliza's shock. "You murdered my husband. You murdered dozens of people through your fraud schemes. You're a thief and a killer hiding behind respectability." "Prove it," Reginald challenged. "You claim murder? Theft? Prove a single word." Eliza opened her mouth and realized with sick horror that she couldn't. Every witness was hidden in the village, unreachable. Every document was gone. They had nothing but accusations, and accusations without evidence were just slander. They had walked into a trap so perfect it was invisible until it snapped shut. Lord Chancellor, Reginald turned to Pemberton, I formally request investigation into these false accusations. Mrs. Ravenscroft and the Duke of Wardmore have attempted to destroy my reputation with manufactured scandal. I want them held accountable. Pemberton's expression was grave. Without evidence, I cannot support these allegations. Your Grace, Mrs. Ravenscroft, I suggest you withdraw your claims immediately. We can't withdraw truth, Nathaniel said desperately. The evidence existed. We had documents, testimonies, bank records, which conveniently vanished. Reginald's voice was silk over steel. How tragic! Almost as tragic as the Duke's first wife falling from a tower or Mr. Ravenscroft falling downstairs. Accidents do seem to follow those who oppose their betters, don't they? The threat was blatant, delivered in front of 300 witnesses, and no one challenged it because Reginald had won. He had destroyed their case before they could present it, turned them into villains, and made himself a victim. Eliza felt the room closing in, felt the weight of failure crushing her. Thomas had died for this. Caroline had died for this, and she had failed them both. Then Margaret appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face pale but determined, holding a small leather journal. Mrs. Ravenscroft. Margaret's voice shook but carried. I found this in your husband's effects. You told me to keep it safe. I think now is the time. Eliza's heart stopped. She didn't know what Margaret was doing. They'd reviewed all of Thomas's papers, but she recognized the lifeline being thrown. Thank you, Margaret. Eliza took the journal with hands that barely trembled. She opened it, praying it contained something, anything useful, and found her miracle. Thomas's handwriting filled the pages, not notes on fraud schemes, but a diary. Personal observations. And on the page dated 3 days before his death, Thomas had written, confronted Reginald Thornton today about the Ashmont foreclosure. He didn't deny it, laughed actually, said I couldn't prove anything, that I should focus on my own business before I suffered an unfortunate accident. I'm not backing down. Tomorrow I'm meeting with the Bank of England to secure audit records. If anything happens to me, Eliza needs to know. Reginald Thornton is a murderer operating in plain sight. He boasted of 3 deaths: Lord Ashmont, riding accident; Sir Markham, house fire; and his own former partner, Edmund Price, drowning. He thinks himself untouchable. He's wrong. Eliza read the entry aloud, her voice gaining strength with each word. The ballroom was silent as a tomb. This is your husband's personal journal? Pemberton asked carefully. Yes. Written 3 days before he died in a fall, Sir Reginald just reminded us all was so tragic. Eliza met Reginald's eyes and saw murder there. You threatened him. He documented it. Then you had him killed. That proves nothing, Reginald said, but his confidence had cracked. Personal diary entries are not legal evidence. Any grieving widow could have written that themselves. Could she have written this? Margaret stepped forward again, holding a small envelope. I found it with the journal. A letter from Mr. Ravenscroft to Mrs. Ravenscroft, sealed with instructions to open only if he died suspiciously. I opened it this morning when I realized what tonight was truly about. Eliza took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet in Thomas's handwriting. My dearest Eliza, if you're reading this, I'm dead and Reginald Thornton is responsible. I've hidden evidence of his fraud schemes in the one place he'll never look, the Ravenscroft family crypt in the churchyard. Behind my grandfather's memorial stone, there's a loose brick. Behind the brick is a strong box containing documents that prove everything: forged loan papers, payoff records to corrupt officials, correspondence between Reginald and the men he's hired to kill his enemies. I pray you never have to read this. But if you do, know that I loved you, that I'm sorry I put you in danger, and that you are stronger than you know. Finish what I started. Destroy him. All my love, Thomas. The ballroom exploded in chaos. Forward. Hand reaching for the letter. But forward, hand reaching for the letter. But Nathaniel stepped between them with the speed of a man who'd survived frontier violence. Don't, Nathaniel said quietly, and something in his voice made Reginald freeze. You've already confessed in front of 300 witnesses. Moving against her now would be signing your own death warrant. That letter is a forgery, Reginald snarled, recovering some of his composure. Another fabrication from a desperate widow and her lover. Anyone can see. The handwriting is Thomas's, Lady Catherine Ashford's voice cut through the chaos. She moved forward from the crowd, her face pale but resolute. I've seen enough of Thomas Ravenscroft's correspondence to recognize his hand. That's genuine. As am I able to attest, added Lord Julian Hartwell, stepping forward beside her. Thomas and I were at Cambridge together. I'd know his writing anywhere. More voices joined, people who had known Thomas, who recognized his distinctive script, who were suddenly seeing past Reginald's carefully constructed innocence to the monster beneath. The crypt, Lord Chancellor Pemberton said, his voice cutting through the growing tumult. If this evidence exists as Mr. Ravenscroft claimed, we retrieve it immediately. Your Grace, how far is the churchyard? 2 miles, Nathaniel replied. But the roads are dangerous at night, and we'd need to break into— I have the key, Eliza said, pulling a small iron key from inside her sleeve. She'd worn it on a chain around her neck since Thomas died, never understanding why he'd given her a key to the family crypt. Now she knew. Thomas gave this to me a week before he died, said it was for safekeeping. I thought he was being sentimental. He was being strategic, Pemberton said grimly. Sir Reginald, you will remain here under guard while we verify these claims. Any attempt to leave will be considered evidence of guilt. This is outrageous, Reginald's veneer cracked completely. You cannot detain me based on the fantasies of a grief-mad widow. I have rights. I have connections. I will see you all ruined for this. Your connections, Pemberton said coldly, will not save you if that strongbox contains what Mrs. Ravenscroft claims. Guards, secure Sir Reginald. No one leaves or enters this ballroom until we return. The ride to the churchyard was undertaken by a grim procession, Eliza and Nathaniel in the lead carriage, Pemberton and 2 magistrates following, with a squadron of guards surrounding them all. The night had turned cold and moonless, wind howling across the moors with a sound like keening ghosts. Margaret sat beside Eliza, clutching her cloak against the chill. I'm sorry I didn't show you the journal and letter sooner, ma'am. You told me to keep Mr. Ravenscroft's personal effects safe, and I thought— You thought right, Eliza interrupted gently. If I'd known about them earlier, I might have mentioned them to the wrong person. Your discretion saved us all. But how did you know to bring them tonight? I didn't know. I just had a feeling. Margaret's voice dropped. This morning, I woke with the strongest sense that Mr. Ravenscroft was trying to tell me something. I know that sounds mad, but it sounds like loyalty, Eliza said, squeezing her maid's hand. Thomas chose well when he trusted you. The Ravenscroft family crypt stood in the shadow of an ancient stone church that predated even Shadowmere House. The churchyard was overgrown, headstones tilting at drunken angles, and the crypt itself was a small stone building with an iron door green with age and weather. Eliza's hand shook as she fitted the key into the lock. For a terrible moment she feared it wouldn't turn. That time and rust had sealed the mechanism shut, but the key turned with a groan of protesting metal, and the door swung open on darkness that smelled of earth and stone and centuries of death. I'll go first, Nathaniel said, taking a lantern from one of the guards. If there's any danger— We go together, Eliza said firmly. We've come this far as partners. We finish as partners. The crypt was smaller than she'd expected. Just a single chamber lined with stone shelves holding the remains of Ravenscrofts going back 4 generations. Thomas's memorial plaque was newest, installed just months ago beside his grandfather's older stone. Behind his grandfather's memorial, just as the letter described, a single brick sat slightly proud of the others. Nathaniel pulled it free, and behind it was a cavity containing a metal strongbox barely larger than a lady's jewelry case. Eliza lifted it out with hands that had stopped shaking. This was Thomas's final gift, his evidence, his justice, his love reaching across death to protect her. The strongbox wasn't locked. Inside were perhaps 50 documents, carefully organized and labeled in Thomas's meticulous handwriting. Eliza leafed through them by lantern light while Pemberton read over her shoulder. Forged loan documents with signatures that didn't match the originals held by the Bank of England. Correspondence between Reginald and corrupt bank officials arranging fraudulent foreclosures. pay off records showing bribes to magistrates and local police. And most damning, a ledger detailing payments to 3 men for special services on dates that corresponded exactly with Lord Ashmont's riding accident, Sir Markham's house fire, and Edmund Price's drowning. "This is extraordinary," Pemberton breathed. "Your husband documented everything. If even half of this is verifiable—" "It's all verifiable," Eliza said with quiet certainty. "Thomas wouldn't have risked his life for anything less than ironclad proof." "Then Sir Reginald Thornton is finished." Pemberton's expression was grim satisfaction. "These documents prove systematic fraud, bribery, conspiracy to commit murder, and likely murder itself. He'll hang for this." Nathaniel was examining a separate packet of papers. "There's more. Evidence connecting the Exeter Consortium to the fraud schemes. Names of other bankers involved. This isn't just Reginald, it's an entire network." "Then we dismantle the entire network," Pemberton said. "But first, we return to Shadowmere House and confront the architect of this corruption." The ride back felt surreal. Eliza held the strongbox on her lap, feeling the weight of justice in her hands. Thomas had died for this. Caroline might have died for this. Dozens of families had been ruined for this. And now, finally, there would be consequences. The ballroom was exactly as they'd left it. 300 guests held captive by circumstance and guards, Reginald surrounded by magistrates, but still maintaining a facade of wounded innocence. Until Eliza walked back onto the orchestra platform holding the strongbox. Reginald's face went gray. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pemberton's voice rang with authority, "we have retrieved the evidence Mr. Ravenscroft described in his final letter. I have reviewed the contents, and I am satisfied that they constitute proof of systematic criminal conspiracy." "You can't possibly believe," Reginald started, but Pemberton cut him off with a gesture. "Sir Reginald Thornton, I am placing you under arrest for fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and suspicion of multiple counts of murder. You will be transported to London tomorrow and held pending formal charges." "This is madness." Reginald's composure shattered completely. "You're taking the word of a dead man and a hysterical widow over a respected banker. I have connections. I have friends in Parliament. You cannot—" "Your connections," Pemberton said coldly, "are about to abandon you like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Guards, take him into custody." Reginald fought as the guards moved to restrain him, his civilized veneer stripped away to reveal the snarling predator beneath. "You think this ends here? You think destroying me destroys what I built? There are others, powerful others who won't let this stand. You've signed your own death warrants, all of you." "Then they can join you in prison," Nathaniel said quietly. "We have their names, Reginald. Every co-conspirator, every bribed official, every participant in your fraud network. Your ledger was very thorough." The fight went out of Reginald like air from a punctured bladder. He sagged between the guards, suddenly looking old and small and defeated. "I should have killed you when I had the chance," he said to Eliza, his voice hollow. "That night at your townhouse. I could have done it myself instead of sending threats. Should have pushed you down those stairs just like I pushed—" He stopped, but the damage was done. The ballroom went deadly silent. "Just like you pushed who?" Pemberton demanded. "Complete that sentence, Sir Reginald." But Reginald had realized his mistake. He clamped his mouth shut, refusing to say more. It didn't matter. Everyone had heard. Everyone understood. Nathaniel's voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper but carried through the silent ballroom like thunder. "You killed Caroline." "I killed no one," Reginald said, but his eyes betrayed him. "You can't prove." "Caroline discovered your fraud schemes through her father's railway business," Nathaniel said, piecing it together with terrible clarity. "She confronted you. You followed her to Shadowmere House the night of that storm. You went up to the tower where she was hiding and you pushed her out that window." "You're insane. I was never—" "There's a guest register," Nathaniel interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "Everyone who visits Shadowmere House signs it. I reviewed it after Caroline died, but I was looking for strangers, for obvious threats. I never thought to question why a family friend would visit during a storm." He turned to his butler, who stood white-faced at the ballroom entrance. "Brennan, the night Caroline died, who was in the house?" The elderly butler's voice shook. "Sir Reginald Thornton, Your Grace." "He arrived late. Said he had urgent business documents for you. I put him in the east parlor to wait, but when I returned to offer refreshment, he was gone. I assumed he'd grown tired of waiting and left. He went to find Caroline, Nathaniel said flatly. He knew she'd discovered his crimes. He knew she was a threat. So he eliminated that threat and let me take the blame. This is all speculation, Reginald snarled. You have no proof. I have your confession, Eliza said quietly, pulling a small device from her reticule, a portable phonograph cylinder that Thomas had purchased the year before his death for documenting business meetings. Nathaniel suggested I bring it tonight in case Reginald said something incriminating. I've been recording since we returned from the crypt. She'd been bluffing. The device was actually broken, hadn't worked in months. But Reginald didn't know that. His face went from defiant to horrified as he realized he'd been trapped not by evidence alone, but by his own arrogance. You... Words failed him. He lunged at Eliza with a roar of pure rage, breaking free from the guards with desperate strength. Nathaniel moved to intercept, but he was too far away. For one terrible moment, Eliza saw murder in Reginald's eyes as his hands reached for her throat. Then Margaret swung the strongbox with all her strength, connecting with Reginald's temple with a sickening crack. Reginald dropped like a felled tree. The ballroom erupted in chaos, shouts, screams, guests surging forward or backing away. Guards rushed to restrain the semi-conscious Reginald, while Margaret stood over him, still clutching the strongbox, her face white with shock and fury. That's for Mr. Ravenscroft, she said quietly, and for every family you destroyed. Pemberton moved to check Reginald's pulse. He's alive. Unconscious, but alive. He looked up at Margaret with something like respect. Quick thinking, young woman. Protective instinct, Margaret corrected, her voice steadying. No one threatens my lady. Eliza pulled Margaret into an embrace, both women shaking with reaction. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. Nathaniel stood beside them, his hand finding Eliza's shoulder. It's over. Finally, it's over. But Eliza knew it wasn't quite over. There was still Reginald's network to dismantle, still trials to endure, still the slow machinery of justice to navigate. This was a victory, but the war would continue for months. Pemberton was already organizing. Guards, take Sir Reginald to the cellars and post a watch. No one sees him without my permission. Your Grace, I'll need secure rooms to begin preliminary interviews with potential witnesses. Mrs. Ravenscroft, I'll need detailed statements from both you and your maid. Tomorrow, Nathaniel said firmly. Tonight, we've all earned rest. Pemberton looked like he wanted to argue, but one look at Eliza's face, pale with exhaustion and reaction, changed his mind. Tomorrow then, first light. The ballroom slowly emptied as guests were released with stern warnings not to discuss what they'd witnessed until official statements were prepared. Most left immediately, desperate to escape the scandal and violence. But some lingered. Lady Catherine Ashford, Lord Julian Hartwell, and a handful of others who approached Eliza with quiet words of support. You were right to fight, Lady Ashford said, taking Eliza's hands. I'm ashamed I didn't see Reginald's true nature sooner. My husband lost money in investments with Thornton's bank. I thought it was merely bad luck. Now I wonder if we were targeted too. If you were, we'll prove it, Eliza promised. Every victim deserves justice. By midnight, Shadowmere House was finally quiet. The guests were gone. Reginald was locked in the cellars under heavy guard, and the evidence strongbox rested in Nathaniel's personal safe. Eliza stood in the tower room where Caroline had died, looking out at the moonlit moors. Nathaniel found her there, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. I thought you might need this, he said, offering her a glass. Eliza accepted gratefully, the burn of alcohol steadying her frayed nerves. I keep thinking about Caroline, about how she died alone, knowing terrible things, with no one to help her. She wasn't completely alone, Nathaniel said quietly. She had the truth, and eventually through you, that truth came to light. 5 years too late. Justice is always too late for the dead. Nathaniel moved to stand beside her at the window. But it matters for the living, for preventing future victims. They stood in comfortable silence, looking out at the harsh landscape that had shaped them both. Thomas had loved these northern territories, had understood the brutal beauty of places that demanded strength to survive. What happens now? Eliza asked finally. After the trials, after Reginald and his network are dismantled, what happens to us? Us? Nathaniel's voice was careful. You and I. Our alliance. Eliza turned to face him. We partnered to survive a threat. Now that threat is eliminated, do we return to being solitary rulers of separate kingdoms? Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the moonlight. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want, Eliza admitted. For 2 years I've been focused on survival, on proving I deserved the empire Thomas left me, on protecting what was mine. I never thought beyond the immediate fight. And now? Now I find myself thinking that partnership has advantages beyond mere survival. She met his eyes. We work well together, Nathaniel. We understand each other in ways most people never will. What we built to fight Reginald, could we build something more permanent? Are you proposing a merger? There was amusement in his voice, but also something deeper. I'm proposing we consider possibilities. Eliza's smile was slight. Your rail lines need coal. My collieries need reliable transport. We could formalize our business relationship, create something neither of us could build alone. Just business? For now. Eliza's honesty was characteristic. I cared for Thomas, but I was never in love with him. He knew it, accepted it, built a partnership on mutual respect rather than passion. I won't dishonor his memory by pretending otherwise. And you loved Caroline despite your incompatibility. I failed Caroline, Nathaniel corrected. Love wasn't enough to save her. But respect might save us. Partnership, equality. Eliza extended her hand. What do you say, Your Grace? Shall we build an empire together? Nathaniel looked at her hand, then at her face, and slowly smiled. A real smile. Not the grim expressions of the past weeks, but something genuine and warm. I say yes, he replied, taking her hand, but not because I need your coal or you need my rails, because I've spent 5 years alone in this fortress, convinced I was meant to be solitary. You showed me partnership is possible, that strength doesn't require isolation. Then we have an accord. Eliza's grip was firm, equal. Partners in business, allies in whatever comes next, and possibly, someday, something more. Someday, Nathaniel agreed, when we're both ready. They sealed the agreement with a handshake that felt more binding than any contract, then stood together at the window where Caroline had died, looking out at the moonlit moors where their combined empire stretched to the horizon. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Lord Chancellor Pemberton interviewed witnesses, documented evidence, and prepared formal charges. Reginald, nursing a magnificent black eye from Margaret's strongbox attack, refused to speak except through his solicitor, who took one look at the evidence and quietly withdrew from the case. By noon, Pemberton had enough testimony to formally charge Reginald with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and murder. Messengers were dispatched to London with arrest warrants for the other members of the fraud network. This will take months to prosecute fully, Pemberton told Eliza and Nathaniel in the study. Years, possibly. But the court case is solid. Sir Reginald will stand trial for his crimes. And Caroline's death, Nathaniel asked quietly, harder to prove definitively without witnesses. But the circumstantial evidence is strong. His presence in the house that night, his motive, his near confession at the ball. Combined with everything else, a jury may well convict him. Pemberton's expression was grave. He'll hang regardless. The fraud and murder charges are more than sufficient. It was over. Not quickly, not cleanly, but decisively. The network that had terrorized northern estate holders, that had killed Thomas and Caroline and countless others, was finally broken. Word spread through London's financial district like wildfire. Thornton Private Banking collapsed within days, its assets frozen pending investigation. The Exeter Consortium faced criminal charges and hemorrhaged investors. Smaller banks connected to the fraud network rushed to cooperate with authorities, hoping to avoid prosecution. The aristocracy, always quick to abandon those who'd fallen from grace, treated Reginald's name as poison. Families who had accepted his hospitality for years now claimed they'd always suspected something was wrong. Eliza watched it all with grim satisfaction. This was justice, imperfect, slow, tangled in bureaucracy, but justice nonetheless. A week after the ball, she stood with Nathaniel at Thomas's grave in the Ravenscroft family churchyard. She'd brought fresh flowers and the strongbox, now empty of evidence, ready to be buried with the man who'd filled it. "You finished what he started," Nathaniel said quietly. "He'd be proud." "I hope so." Eliza knelt to place the flowers on the grave. "I hope he knows that his death wasn't meaningless, that his courage saved others." "He knows," Nathaniel's voice was certain. "Wherever he is, he knows." They stood in silence for a while, paying respects to a man who had loved fiercely, fought bravely, and died protecting others from a predator operating in plain sight. Finally, Eliza stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. "I'm ready to go home now." "London?" "No." She looked north toward the moors and the industrial kingdom she'd inherited and expanded. "Home. To the collieries. To the work that matters. Will you come visit? We should discuss that partnership we're building." "I'll come," Nathaniel promised. "But first there's something I need to do." That evening, with Eliza standing witness, Nathaniel ordered the tower at Shadowmere House demolished. It took 3 days and a crew of workers with hammers and determination, but when they finished, the cursed tower was nothing but rubble. "Caroline can rest now," Nathaniel said, watching the sun set over the ruins. "And so can I." 2 weeks later, Eliza returned to her northern estate to find the workers who'd thought her soft and weak now greeting her with genuine respect. Word of the ball at Shadowmere House had spread, embellished and dramatized with each retelling until Eliza had become a legend. The widow who'd faced down banking corruption, who'd exposed murderers, who'd proved that strength had nothing to do with gender. Her foreman, a grizzled man named Davies who'd worked in the mines for 40 years, approached her with something like reverence. "Mrs. Ravenscroft, ma'am, the men wanted me to tell you, we're proud to work for you. Mr. Ravenscroft was a good man, but you're something more. You're a fighter." "We're all fighters, Davies," Eliza replied. "The only difference is some of us get recognized for it and some don't, but the fight is what matters." That night, alone in the study that had been Thomas's and was now hers, Eliza wrote letters. To the families Reginald had ruined, offering assistance in rebuilding. To Lord Chancellor Pemberton, providing additional evidence and testimony. To Nathaniel, discussing plans for their combined industrial empire. And finally, one letter to Thomas himself, never to be sent, meant only for her own closure. "My dearest Thomas, I finished what you started. Reginald Thornton will hang for his crimes. The fraud network is broken. Justice, however imperfect, has been served. I've learned something these past months. You once told me that power unused is power wasted. I understand now what you meant. We don't hold power for its own sake. We hold it to protect those who can't protect themselves. To build systems that serve rather than exploit. To leave the world better than we found it. You left me an empire and the strength to defend it. I promise you, I will use both wisely. I will never stop missing you, but I will also never stop fighting. All my love, Eliza." She folded the letter and placed it in Thomas's desk, then turned to the window where northern stars blazed cold and clear above industrial territory that belonged to her now, not by marriage, not by inheritance, but by right of conquest over those who'd tried to take it. Eliza Ravenscroft had entered London society as a widow, expecting whispers and judgment. She had left as a force to be reckoned with, and the frontier, harsh, beautiful, and unforgiving, had gained a sovereign who understood that true power came not from hiding behind walls, but from standing unafraid in the storm. The trial of Sir Reginald Thornton began on a bitter February morning 6 months after the ball at Shadowmere House. London's Old Bailey Courthouse was packed to capacity, every seat filled with aristocrats, journalists, and common citizens united by morbid curiosity about how far a respected banker had fallen. Eliza sat in the gallery beside Nathaniel, their presence a silent testimony to everything they'd survived. She wore black, still in widow's mourning, though the grief had transformed from sharp agony to dull permanence. Nathaniel wore formal court dress, his rough frontier edges polished to aristocratic gleam, though his eyes remained as hard as northern steel. Reginald sat in the dock looking diminished. Prison had stripped away his prosperity, leaving behind a middle-aged man whose arrogance had curdled into bitterness. He stared at nothing, his solicitor whispering urgently in his ear, but Eliza knew defeat when she saw it. The evidence was overwhelming. Thomas's strongbox had yielded not just documents, but a roadmap to an entire criminal enterprise. The prosecution had spent months following every thread, interviewing every victim, building a case so comprehensive that even Reginald's expensive legal team couldn't find cracks. Lord Chancellor Pemberton served as chief prosecutor, his opening statement delivered with the precision of a surgeon's blade. Gentlemen of the jury, over the next weeks you will hear evidence of crimes that strike at the very foundation of English society. Fraud, forgery, bribery, conspiracy, and murder, multiple murders, committed by a man who used respectability as a mask for predation. Reginald's solicitor tried to argue reasonable doubt, to paint his client as a businessman caught in unfortunate circumstances. But as witness after witness took the stand, bank clerks who'd forged documents under orders, magistrates who'd accepted bribes, families destroyed by fraudulent foreclosures, the mask crumbled completely. On the trial's third day, Eliza was called to testify. She climbed to the witness box with steady hands, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. The prosecutor, a stern man named Wickham, approached with the strongbox Thomas had hidden. "Mrs. Ravenscroft, can you identify this object?" "Yes. It's the strongbox my late husband concealed in our family crypt. It contains evidence of Sir Reginald's criminal activities." "And how did you come to discover this strongbox?" Eliza recounted the entire story. Thomas's investigation, his suspicious death, the threatening letters, her partnership with Nathaniel, the confrontation at Shadowmere House. She spoke clearly, without embellishment, letting facts carry the weight of truth. Reginald's solicitor cross-examined aggressively. "Mrs. Ravenscroft, isn't it true you had financial motivations for destroying my client's reputation? That your collieries compete with rail lines financed by his banking house?" "My collieries prosper regardless of Sir Reginald's activities," Eliza replied calmly. "My motivation was justice for my murdered husband." "You claim murder, yet the coroner ruled Mr. Ravenscroft's death accidental." "The coroner didn't have access to Thomas's journal documenting Sir Reginald's threats, or evidence that my husband was investigating fraud that would have destroyed Sir Reginald's enterprise." Eliza's voice remained steady. "But this jury does. You've also formed a romantic alliance with the Duke of Wardmore, haven't you? A man whose late wife died under similarly suspicious circumstances?" "I formed a business partnership with His Grace," Eliza corrected, "and those circumstances are no longer suspicious. They're criminal. Sir Reginald murdered Caroline Wardmore to silence her, just as he murdered my husband. That's speculation. It's evidence. Evidence this court will hear from multiple witnesses." The cross-examination continued for 2 hours, but Eliza never wavered. She'd survived London society's judgment, Reginald's threats, and her own grief. A hostile solicitor was nothing by comparison. When she stepped down, Nathaniel caught her hand briefly. "Well done," he murmured. "Thomas would be proud." The trial continued for 3 weeks. The prosecution called 76 witnesses, introduced hundreds of documents, and methodically dismantled every defense Reginald's team attempted. The courtroom heard from families ruined by fraudulent foreclosures, from bank employees coerced into criminal acts, from investigators who'd traced payments to hired killers. The most damning testimony came from a man named Robert Carstairs, one of the killers Reginald had hired. Facing his own murder charges, Carstairs had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. "I was paid £500 to arrange Thomas Ravenscroft's death," Carstairs said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Made it look like an accident. Pushed down the stairs when he was alone. Sir Reginald said Ravenscroft was causing problems, needed to be eliminated." "And did Sir Reginald specify what problems?" the prosecutor asked. "Said Ravenscroft was investigating banking fraud, had evidence that could destroy him, couldn't let that stand." Reginald's solicitor tried to discredit Carstairs, a criminal, a liar, a man trading testimony for leniency. But the details matched too perfectly with Thomas's journal entries, with the timeline of his investigation, with the evidence in the strongbox. On the trial's final day, Reginald himself took the stand, against his solicitor's advice. Perhaps he believed his aristocratic bearing would sway the jury. Perhaps he simply couldn't bear remaining silent while his empire crumbled. "I'm not the monster they've painted," he said, his voice carrying traces of old authority. "I'm a banker who made difficult decisions in a competitive market. If some practices were questionable, I acted within legal boundaries as they were understood at the time." "You hired assassins," the prosecutor said flatly. "You murdered people who threatened your fraud schemes. You've destroyed families for profit." "I protected my business interests. That's not criminal, that's practical." "Did you murder Thomas Ravenscroft?" Reginald's pause lasted 3 seconds too long. "No." "Did you murder Caroline Wardmore?" "She fell. It was an accident." "You were in Shadowmere House the night she died. You went to the tower where she was hiding. Why?" "To discuss business with the Duke." "At midnight? During a storm? With the Duke's wife, not the Duke himself?" The prosecutor's voice dripped contempt. "Or did you go there because Caroline had discovered your fraud network through her father's railway business? Because she threatened to expose you?" "That's speculation. Answer the question, Sir Reginald. Did you push Caroline Wardmore from that tower to silence her?" "No." But Reginald's face had gone gray, sweat beading on his forehead. "I never... She was already at the window when I arrived. I tried to stop her, but she..." He stopped, realizing too late that he'd confirmed his presence in the tower. The courtroom erupted. The judge gavelled for order, but the damage was done. Reginald had just placed himself at the scene of Caroline's death, contradicting years of denials. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, their verdict was unanimous on all counts. Guilty. Guilty of fraud. Guilty of conspiracy. Guilty of arranging multiple murders. And guilty of the direct murder of Caroline Wardmore, based on his own testimony, placing him in the tower at the moment of her death. The judge sentenced Reginald to death by hanging. Eliza felt no joy in the verdict, only grim satisfaction that justice, however delayed, had finally arrived. Beside her, Nathaniel sat very still, his expression unreadable. For 5 years he'd carried guilt over Caroline's death. Now that burden had been lifted, but the cost had been terrible. "It's over," Eliza said quietly, as they left the courthouse through crowds of shouting journalists and curious onlookers. "No," Nathaniel replied. "Now it begins." The execution was scheduled for 6 weeks later, giving Reginald time to settle his affairs and make peace with his fate. During those weeks, more members of the fraud network were arrested and tried. The Exeter Consortium collapsed, its principals facing criminal charges. Smaller banks implicated in the schemes rushed to reform their practices, terrified of similar prosecution. The scandal reshaped London's financial industry. Parliament passed new banking regulations. The Bank of England implemented stricter oversight. Victims of fraudulent foreclosures received compensation from seized assets. And Eliza and Nathaniel, the two people who had risked everything to expose the corruption, found themselves transformed from social pariahs into unlikely heroes. Lady Catherine Ashford hosted a dinner in their honor, her London mansion filled with aristocrats who had once whispered about Eliza's audacity and Nathaniel's rough origins. Now they praised their courage, their integrity, their dedication to justice. Eliza found the adulation exhausting. 3 years ago, these same people called me unsuitable, she murmured to Nathaniel during a particularly effusive toast. Now I'm a paragon of virtue. The hypocrisy is staggering. Society always rewrites history to favor itself, Nathaniel replied. They need heroes to admire so they can feel better about ignoring corruption while it flourished. Cynical but accurate. Eliza raised her glass to yet another toast, her smile practiced and hollow. But not everyone's praise rang false. Lord Julian Hartwell approached them with genuine warmth. You two accomplished something extraordinary, not just exposing Reginald, but forcing the entire banking system to reform. That's legacy work. Thomas accomplished it, Eliza corrected. We just finished what he started. Thomas gathered evidence. You had the courage to use it when doing so meant risking your life. Julian's expression was serious. Don't diminish your own role in this. You changed the world, Eliza. Own that. Later, standing on Lady Ashford's balcony looking out at London's gaslit streets, Eliza considered Julian's words. She had changed the world, or at least her small corner of it. The question was what to do with that change. "I've been thinking about the Northern Territories," she said to Nathaniel, who had joined her in the cold night air. "About the workers in the mines and factories. We exposed banking corruption, but there's other corruption too. Working conditions, safety violations, children laboring in dangerous environments." "You want to expand your crusade," Nathaniel said, understanding immediately. "I want to use this moment, while we have society's attention and respect, to push for reforms that actually matter." Eliza's voice gained intensity. "We proved that challenging power is possible. Why stop with banking fraud?" Nathaniel studied her face in the lamplight. "You've thought this through." "I've thought about little else. Thomas died fighting corruption. Caroline died discovering it. If their deaths mean anything, it's that silence enables predation. We have to keep fighting." "We?" Nathaniel smiled slightly. "You're assuming I'll join this new crusade, won't you?" Eliza met his eyes. "You built your rail empire alongside your workers, treated them as partners, not slaves. You understand that industry thrives when people are protected, not exploited. Together, we could implement reforms across the Northern Territories, set standards that other industries would have to follow. It would make us unpopular again. The same aristocrats currently praising us would turn hostile if we threatened their profit margins." "Let them." Eliza's voice was steel. "I didn't survive the past year to return to hiding. If we have power, we use it for something that matters." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, watching London's lights twinkle below. Then he extended his hand. "Partners in justice, then, not just business." "Partners in everything," Eliza agreed, taking his hand. "Until the work is done or we are." The handshake felt like a vow. Reginald's execution took place on a gray March morning at Newgate Prison. Eliza didn't attend. She had no desire to witness death, even of a man who'd earned it. But Nathaniel went, feeling he owed Caroline that much. He returned to the Wardmore London house, looking exhausted and relieved in equal measure. "It's finished," he told Eliza, who had waited for him in the study. He went quietly, no last words, no dramatic confession, just ended. "Good." Eliza poured him whiskey. "Now we can move forward." "I thought I'd feel different, vindicated or satisfied or something." Nathaniel accepted the glass gratefully. "But I just feel tired. 5 years of carrying guilt, and now it's gone, but the weight is still there." "Grief doesn't disappear just because justice arrives," Eliza said gently. "You loved Caroline despite everything. That love doesn't become invalid because she was murdered." "I failed her." "You didn't know she was in danger." "Neither did I with Thomas." Eliza sat beside him. "We can't save people from threats we don't see. All we can do is ensure their deaths weren't meaningless. That's what we're doing, honoring them by continuing their fight." Nathaniel looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "When did you become so wise?" "When survival required it." Eliza's smile was slight. 2 years ago, I was a merchant's daughter playing at being an aristocrat's wife. Now, I'm something else entirely." "What are you now?" Eliza considered the question seriously. "A force. Someone who refuses to accept injustice as inevitable. Someone who believes power should serve, not just dominate." She met his eyes. "What are you?" "Your partner," Nathaniel replied simply. "In business, in reform, and increasingly in everything else." The words hung between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to fully explore. Their partnership had begun as pragmatic alliance against a common threat. It had evolved into genuine friendship forged through shared trauma. And now it was becoming something more, though what that something was remained undefined. "We should discuss the Northern Territories," Eliza said, changing the subject to safer ground. "I've been reviewing worker safety reports from my collieries. The accident rates are unconscionable." "Mine too," Nathaniel admitted. "I've implemented some reforms, ventilation improvements, mandatory safety equipment, but it's not enough." "Then we do more. We set new standards and enforce them across every mine and factory we control. We create models that prove industrial success doesn't require worker exploitation." They spent the evening drafting proposals. Reduced working hours, mandatory safety protocols, compensation for injured workers, schools for workers' children. Reforms that seemed radical but were simply decent. This will cost significant money short-term, Nathaniel noted, reviewing the numbers. Productivity may drop initially while workers adjust. But long-term productivity will increase, Eliza countered. Healthy, educated workers are more efficient. Lower accident rates mean less disruption. This is good business, not just good morality. You'll need to convince other industrialists of that. Most see workers as expendable resources. Then we'll prove them wrong by example. Eliza's determination was absolute. The Ravenscroft collieries and Wardmore rail lines will demonstrate that ethical industry is viable industry. 6 months after Reginald's execution, Eliza and Nathaniel implemented their reforms across the Northern Territories. The changes were dramatic and immediate. Working hours cut from 14 to 10, safety equipment made mandatory, child labor banned in hazardous occupations, schools established in every mining village. Other industrialists protested loudly. "You're coddling workers," Lord Pembroke complained at a London business meeting, "setting dangerous precedents. Workers will demand these luxuries everywhere." "They're not luxuries," Eliza replied calmly. "They're basic human rights, and if workers demand them everywhere, that's progress, not danger. It's financial suicide. You'll both be bankrupt within 2 years." "We'll see," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who'd built empires in impossible places. "I'm willing to bet that treating people decently produces better results than exploiting them." The bet paid off. Within a year, the Ravenscroft collieries showed increased productivity despite reduced hours. Accident rates dropped by 60%. Worker turnover, previously high due to dangerous conditions, nearly disappeared. The Wardmore rail lines experienced similar improvements. Other industrialists, seeing the success, began grudgingly implementing similar reforms. Not from morality, most lacked Eliza and Nathaniel's principles, but from pragmatism. If ethical treatment produced better results, even the most cynical businessman would adapt. The reforms spread across England's industrial north like wildfire. Within 3 years, working conditions had improved dramatically. Parliament, pressured by both worker activism and the evidence from Eliza and Nathaniel's territories, passed national labor protection laws. Eliza stood on a ridge overlooking the Ravenscroft collieries on a crisp autumn morning, watching workers arrive for their shifts. They walked with purpose, not exhausted defeat. They laughed, talked, looked healthy rather than haunted. Below in the valley, a new school building rose, the third she'd built, ensuring every worker's child could receive education. Thomas would have loved this, she thought. Not the acclaim or recognition, but the tangible proof that industry could serve rather than consume. "Impressive view," Nathaniel's voice came from behind her. He'd ridden over from his nearby rail depot, wanting to discuss expansion plans. "I was just thinking about Thomas," Eliza said, "about how he'd feel seeing this. Proud, vindicated." Nathaniel moved to stand beside her. "You've honored his legacy better than any monument could." "We honored it. This was partnership, remember? Speaking of partnership," Nathaniel's voice carried a note Eliza had learned to recognize. Serious intention masked as casual conversation. "I've been thinking about our arrangement." "Our business arrangement?" "Our entire arrangement." He turned to face her fully. "Eliza, we've been partners for nearly 2 years. We've built empires together, reformed industries together, survived threats together. We're together constantly, and yet we maintain this fiction that we're merely business associates." Eliza's heart began to race. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we acknowledge what everyone already assumes, that we're more than partners, that we've become essential to each other." Nathaniel's expression was vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "I'm not asking for romance or grand passion. We're both too pragmatic for that. But I am asking for honesty, for acknowledgement that what we've built together is permanent." "Marriage," Eliza said, the word feeling strange on her tongue. "Partnership with legal recognition." Nathaniel smiled slightly. "I know you value independence. I'm not asking you to surrender that. I'm asking you to formalize what already exists." Eliza looked out at the collieries, at the empire she'd built from grief and determination. Thomas's empire, expanded and transformed into something new. Adding Nathaniel's name to that empire would change everything, or would it? They already worked together constantly, already made decisions jointly, already trusted each other with everything that mattered. Marriage would simply formalize what was already true. Yes, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice, but on conditions. Name them. We remain equal partners. I keep control of the Ravenscroft estates. You keep control of Wardmore Holdings. We share what we build together, but we don't subsume one another. Agreed. What else? We maintain separate residences when needed. I love the Northern Territories, but I don't want to be trapped in Shadowmere House or any other single location. Also agreed. I prefer you happy and free rather than confined and resentful. And we acknowledge that this is partnership first, romance second. We care for each other, but we're not pretending to be storybook lovers. We're survivors who found each other in hell and decided to build heaven, Nathaniel said quietly. That's more valuable than storybook romance. Eliza extended her hand, and Nathaniel took it, pulling her close. When he kissed her, it felt less like passion and more like homecoming. Two people who'd fought alone finally finding refuge in each other. When? She asked when they separated. Whenever you're ready. I've waited 5 years to feel whole again. I can wait however long you need. Spring, Eliza decided. After winter breaks. We'll marry here, in the Northern Territories, where we both belong. They married on a bright April morning in the small church where Thomas was buried. Eliza wore silver silk, not white, never white again, and carried northern wildflowers. Nathaniel wore formal dress that he'd learned to inhabit comfortably, though he'd always be more at home in work clothes. Margaret served as maid of honor, tears streaming down her face through the entire ceremony. Davies the foreman gave Eliza away, his gruff voice cracking as he pronounced her the finest woman he'd ever known. The guest list was small: Lord Chancellor Pemberton, Lady Catherine Ashford, Lord Julian Hartwell, and a dozen workers from the collieries and rail lines. No massive aristocratic spectacle, just people who genuinely supported them through hell. The vows were traditional, except for one addition Eliza insisted on. When the minister asked if she would honor and obey her husband, she replied clearly, "I will honor Nathaniel as my partner. I will work with him as an equal. I will love him as he deserves, but I will not obey anyone." The congregation laughed. Nathaniel grinned. The minister looked flustered but continued. "Do you, Nathaniel Wardmore, take Eliza Ravenscroft as your wife?" "I do. As my partner, my equal, and my choice." They sealed the vows with a kiss that felt like promise and defiance in equal measure. Promise to build something lasting, defiance against everyone who'd said a widow and a duke couldn't forge their own path. The wedding breakfast was held at the colliery's new community hall, built for worker gatherings and education. Long tables groaned under food prepared by local families. Children ran wild while adults talked and laughed and celebrated not just a marriage, but what that marriage represented. Proof that new beginnings were possible even after devastating loss. Eliza found herself standing outside in afternoon sun, watching workers dance to fiddle music. Nathaniel joined her, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "Happy?" he asked. "Yes, but also thinking about everyone who should be here and isn't." Eliza raised her glass toward the churchyard where Thomas rested. "He made this possible. Everything I've become. Everything we've built. It started with him. Then we honor him by continuing forward." Nathaniel clinked his glass against hers. "To Thomas Ravenscroft, who believed his wife could change the world. And to Caroline Wardmore," Eliza added, "who deserved better than what she got. To both of them. And to us, survivors who refused to break." They drank, and in that moment Eliza felt the weight of the past 2 years finally shift from burden to foundation. Thomas's death would always hurt. The injustices they'd uncovered would always haunt her, but she'd transformed that pain into purpose, that grief into change. She was no longer the trembling widow who'd walked into that London ballroom expecting judgment. She was Eliza Ravenscroft Wardmore, industrialist, reformer, partner to a duke who'd learned that strength didn't require isolation. 3 years later, Eliza stood before Parliament's House of Lords presenting legislation for national labor protections. Lord Chancellor Pemberton had sponsored the bill, but Eliza provided the testimony that brought it to life. Stories of workers saved by safety reforms, children educated instead of exploited, communities transformed by ethical industry. Some argue these regulations will damage English competitiveness, she said, her voice carrying through the chamber. I argue the opposite. Nations that protect their people are stronger, not weaker. Industry built on exploitation is unsustainable. Industry built on partnership thrives. The Lords passed the legislation by narrow margin. The Commons followed within weeks. By year's end, labor protections similar to those Eliza and Nathaniel had pioneered in the Northern Territories were law throughout England. The victory felt both enormous and inadequate. So much remained to be done: women's suffrage, education reform, housing improvements, healthcare access. But it was progress, and progress mattered. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, Eliza visited his grave with Nathaniel and their infant daughter, Caroline Eliza Wardmore, named for two people who'd died too young, but whose legacies lived on through those who'd survived them. Your father was brave, Eliza told the sleeping baby, though her words were really for Thomas's spirit. He fought corruption when doing so meant risking everything. He believed in justice even when justice seemed impossible. And he trusted me to continue his work when he couldn't. She placed wildflowers on the grave, the same northern blooms she'd carried at her wedding. I kept my promise, Thomas. I finished what you started, and I'll keep fighting until there's nothing left to fight for. Nathaniel's hand found her shoulder, steady and warm. We'll keep fighting, he corrected gently, together. The baby stirred, making small sounds that would soon become laughter, then words, then questions about the world she'd inherited. A world still flawed, still unjust, but better than it had been because people had refused to accept cruelty as inevitable. They walked back through the churchyard toward their carriage, a small family forged from tragedy and determination. Behind them, Thomas's grave stood silent in afternoon sun, a memorial to a man who'd believed one person could make a difference. He'd been right. The Northern Territories stretched before them, miles of moorland and industry, coal smoke and wildflowers, harsh beauty that demanded strength to survive. Workers moved through the landscape with purpose rather than defeat. Children attended schools instead of working in mines. Communities thrived rather than merely endured. This was Thomas's legacy, Caroline's legacy. And now it was also the legacy Eliza and Nathaniel were building for Caroline Eliza. A world where courage mattered more than circumstance, where justice was pursued not just promised, where power served rather than destroyed. Eliza Ravenscroft had returned to London society expecting whispers and judgment. She'd faced threats, corruption, and murder. She'd stood before assassins and aristocrats and refused to break. And in surviving, in fighting, in demanding better, she'd proven that widows didn't have to hide, that women didn't have to surrender, that one person's courage could spark revolutions. The frontier had tested her. She'd tested it back. And together with a duke who understood that true nobility meant protecting the vulnerable, she'd reshaped her corner of the world into something worth fighting for. The carriage rolled north toward home, not London's glittering ballrooms, but the industrial territories where real work happened, where real lives were changed, where real power lay not in titles, but in transformation. Eliza held her daughter close, looked at her husband who'd been forged by the same fires that had tempered her, and smiled. The battle was won, the war continued, and she'd never been more ready to fight.